July 1944. The Normandy hedgerows. A U.S. rifle platoon pushes across an open field when the air rips apart. It's an MG-42 firing from a hidden nest. As the men scramble for cover, a single, sharp crack, a sniper's rifle. The platoon leader, a second lieutenant, falls. From the German position, this is a textbook engagement. The American unit is now decapitated. Without its officer, it should break, falter, be suppressed. But in the chaos and flying dirt, something else happens, something the German training manuals didn't account for. This was not an anomaly, it was a pattern, observed with a mix of confusion and grudging respect by German commanders across the front. They saw American units absorb devastating leadership losses, yet somehow they kept coming. This resilience wasn't about individual heroics. It was the product of a hidden architecture within the U.S. Army, a system of training and doctrine designed for this very chaos. What was the secret to this resilience, and why did force the Germans often dismissed as clumsy prove so brutally effective when decapitated? To understand the system, one must first understand the tactical hell that made it an absolute necessity. That tactical hell was the Normandy bocage. This wasn't a battlefield, it was a labyrinth, a maze of small fields, sunken lanes, and ancient hedgerows, impenetrable walls of earth, stone, and tangled roots, some 10 feet high and just as thick. For centuries, they had served to fence in livestock. In the summer of 1944, they served to create thousands of miniature, interlocking fortresses. This terrain systematically dismantled the pillars of Allied military doctrine. Air power was blinded. Pilots flying over the dense green canopy couldn't spot the camouflaged machine gun nests and mortar pits below. Armor was neutered. Tanks were either funneled into narrow, pre-sighted killing zones or got stuck trying to claw their way through the hedgerows, their vulnerable underbellies exposed. This twisted the campaign into something the planners had never fully anticipated. It became an infantryman's war, fought with rifles, grenades, and bayonets. Progress was measured not in miles, but in yards. One hedgerow, one field, one ditch at a time. In this brutal, close-quarters environment, the man with the most dangerous job in the U.S. Army was the rifle platoon leader. A second lieutenant was expected to lead from the front. He was the one who had to stand up under fire, to signal the advance, to be the first one over the hedgerow. This visibility made him a priority target. German doctrine, honed over years of war, explicitly called for targeting leaders to disrupt enemy command and control. The results were catastrophic. In the first 6 weeks after D-Day, the casualty rate for infantry lieutenants was astronomical. In some frontline divisions, the average combat life expectancy for a new platoon leader was less than 2 weeks. The 90th Infantry Division, for example, lost over 100% of its original rifle company officers in July alone, meaning even the replacements were becoming casualties. The Allied command was watching its junior leadership cadre being systematically annihilated. The entire Normandy offensive was in danger of bleeding out, not from a lack of men or machines, but from a critical shortage of leaders on the ground. This relentless attrition created a constant leadership vacuum at the most critical level of combat. So what happened in those crucial seconds after an officer was hit? What happened when the voice of command went silent? The answer comes not with a shout, but with a movement. As the men hug the dirt, a staff sergeant, the platoon sergeant, begins to crawl. There is no discussion, no vote, no visible panic. He moves deliberately toward the fallen lieutenant. He doesn't check for a pulse. He reaches for the officer's gear, the map case, the compass, the binoculars, the tools of command. With the symbols of authority now in his hands, He scrambles back and summons his two remaining squad leaders, both sergeants themselves. The conference is short, barely audible over the relentless hammering of the MG-42. He points to a position on the map, confirming their original objective. Then come the orders. Simple, direct. One squad is to provide a base of fire, concentrating everything they have on the enemy position to force their heads down. The other squad, using that covering fire, will begin a wide movement to the left, using the terrain to flank the machine gun. The platoon, leaderless and inert just moments ago, is now a functioning tactical organism executing a complex maneuver under fire. But this sergeant's decisive action wasn't a moment of battlefield inspiration. It was the product of a system. To understand it, we have to go back thousands of miles and months earlier to the training grounds of Fort Benning, Georgia. At Fort Benning and other training centers across the United States, the Army was running a factory. But it wasn't producing tanks or bullets. It was mass-producing leaders. The U.S. Army leadership, planning for a global war, knew they would not have the luxury of the German model, the long-serving professional Unteroffizier, a man who had spent a decade or more mastering his craft. America had to build an army of millions, fast, and that army would suffer casualties. So, the training was engineered for attrition. Aspiring sergeants were not taught to be tactical geniuses. They were drilled, relentlessly, on what the Army called school solutions. These were prepackaged answers to the most common and deadly problems of infantry combat. A group of NCO candidates would be on a training field. An instructor would yell, "You're taking fire from a machine gun in that tree line. Your lieutenant is down. What are your actions?" There was only one correct answer. Not the most creative, not the most brilliant, but the one drilled into them 1,000 times. Lay down a base of fire. Maneuver to the flank. They practiced it until it was no longer a thought, but a reflex. The training was designed to burn away the moment of hesitation, the fatal pause where a leaderless unit freezes. Taking command wasn't supposed to be a decision. It was a programmed response. This training was the hardware. But it needed software to run. That software was the Standard Operating Procedure, or SOP. For a rifle platoon, the SOP was not a set of guidelines, it was a tactical Bible. It dictated everything, from the formation for moving through a forest to the precise way to set up a defensive perimeter, down to the exact spacing between foxholes. To an outside observer, it might seem rigid, a system that stifled initiative, but its true power was revealed in moments of chaos, because the most important part of the SOP was the automatic, non-negotiable succession of command. Paragraph 1, Section A. The platoon leader is in command. Paragraph 1, Section B. If the platoon leader is killed or wounded, command automatically passes to the platoon sergeant. Paragraph 1, Section C. If the platoon sergeant is also a casualty, command passes to the senior squad leader. There was no ambiguity, no moment of doubt where men look at each other wondering who is in charge. The SOP removed the human element of fear and indecision. The man with the next rank down was in charge. It was his duty to take it. To refuse was to disobey a direct order. This procedural clarity was the invisible architecture that held the platoon together when it was being torn apart. This American system of command was a complete mystery to its primary opponent. The German military operated on a fundamentally different philosophy, Auftragstaktik, or mission-type tactics. German officers and NCOs were trained to understand the intent of their commander's order, and then given broad freedom to achieve the goal as they saw fit. They valued flexibility, battlefield improvisation, and the individual tactical skill of the leader. From this perspective, the American reliance on SOPs looked like a critical weakness. In their initial analyses of the Normandy fighting, German intelligence officers saw American units as schematic and predictable. They observed that when an officer was targeted and killed, the American platoon would often pause, sometimes for several minutes. Based on their own doctrine, the Germans logically concluded that the unit was now paralyzed, a body without a head, waiting to be dismantled. They made targeting American lieutenants a tactical priority, believing it was the fastest way to render a platoon combat ineffective. But as the brutal summer of 1944 wore on, a different, more confusing picture began to emerge in German intelligence reports. The pause was still there, but it wasn't the prelude to collapse, it was the prelude to something else. Intelligence summaries from the German 7th Army and Panzer Lehr Division, units locked in the deadliest fighting of the Bocage, began to include notes of grudging surprise. One authenticated report, summarizing interrogations and battlefield observations, noted, "The tactical leadership of the American infantry is schematic. They are slow to react, and their plans can often be foreseen." But then came the correction, the detail that defied their own military logic. However, the non-commissioned officers frequently display a surprising ability to take charge after the officer has fallen. While there is a noticeable pause in the unit's action, it is often followed by a renewed, if less imaginative, continuation of the attack. The enemy platoon seems to regenerate its leadership, making it difficult to permanently neutralize. The Germans were witnessing the system work. They saw a pause and thought it was paralysis, but it was the system rebooting. It was the time it took for the platoon sergeant to crawl to his lieutenant, for the squad leaders to be summoned, for the simple school solution plan to be issued. The Americans weren't relying on a brilliant leader to save them. They were relying on a resilient system to absorb the loss and continue the mission. The factory-made leader and his by-the-book playbook were proving brutally effective. The American system of decentralized procedural command proved remarkably resilient. But this resilience came at a terrible price and created a new, dangerous vulnerability. But this very system, designed for resilience, carried within it a fatal vulnerability. The Germans were learning. Their snipers and machine gunners, patient and battle-hardened, began to recognize the American sequence. First, the officer. Then they would wait, their sights scanning for the man with the staff sergeant's chevrons, who would inevitably crawl forward to take command. He became priority target number 2. This systematic elimination of the NCO Corps created a second, deeper leadership crisis, erasing the platoon's most experienced soldiers and its institutional memory. The other vulnerability was tactical. The American school solution, base of fire, maneuver to the flank, had become predictable. A veteran German squad dug into a strong point could read the play before it happened. They would anticipate the flanking maneuver, sighting a second hidden machine gun not on the Americans they could see, but on the covered route their flanking squad was most likely to take. The SOP, a tool for survival, was now leading men directly into a preset trap. Back in the Normandy field, the platoon sergeant isn't thinking about German adaptations. He is executing the only plan he knows. The air fills with the steady thump, thump, thump of a Browning automatic rifle, and the sharp ping of M1 Garands. The base of fire squad does its job, pouring rounds into the German position, forcing the gunners to keep their heads down. Under this canopy of steel, the assault squad moves, almost invisible, using the deep shadow of the hedgerow as their highway. The final moments are a blur of motion. Grenades arc over the top of the embankment, followed by a rush of men. Shouts, the crack of rifles at point-blank range, then a sudden, deafening silence. The MG-42 is quiet. The objective is taken. But as the sergeant moves to consolidate his position, the cost becomes clear. 2 more men are down, unmoving. One of them wears the chevrons of a corporal, a squad leader. Another NCO, gone. His platoon is now critically weakened. But there is no time for grief, no moment to rest. He knows the German response will be fast and brutal. With fewer men and now even fewer leaders, he must immediately reorganize what's left, sight his weapons, and prepare for the counterattack he knows is coming, just over the next hedgerow. And so, the platoon held. The answer to why it didn't break isn't found in one man's courage, but in the calculated resilience of a system. The U.S. Army, anticipating a war of attrition, had built a command structure for attrition. It created a deep bench of non-commissioned officers, trained not just to follow orders, but to issue them. The standard operating procedure provided a common language and a clear plan when chaos reigned. This industrial-scale approach to leadership, while bloody and predictable, was brutally suited for the grinding, close-quarters reality of the hedgerows. It ensured that for every leader who fell, another was ready, by doctrine, to step up. This unglamorous, methodical system was a critical engine that kept the Allied advance grinding forward, yard by painful yard. In the brutal, close-quarters fighting of the Normandy hedgerows, America's most effective weapon proved to be not a tank, a plane, or a bomb. It was a sergeant, armed with a simple, by-the-book plan, and the absolute authority to take command the moment his officer fell.